Inside Delaware State Prison, small state, maximum security. Delaware is easy to overlook. It's one of the smallest states in America, quiet, compact, often bypassed in conversations about crime, incarceration, and prison systems. You can drive across it in less than 2 hours. There are no massive prison networks stretching across deserts, no sprawling correctional empires like those in California or Texas. But inside this small state stands a facility that carries the full weight of maximum security incarceration. The James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. From the outside, it looks like many prisons across the United States, layers of fencing, concrete structures, and watchful towers. But what happens inside is shaped by pressures that don't always make headlines. Because in a system this size, every issue, staffing shortages, inmate tensions, policy decisions, is felt more intensely. There is less room to absorb mistakes. Less distance between stability and crisis. And in 2017, that fragile balance would be tested in a way no one inside could ignore. What happened here didn't just affect Delaware. It forced a national conversation about prison conditions, safety, and control. But to understand how it happened, you have to start by understanding the system itself. Because this prison was never just a building. It was a pressure point.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
The foundation of Delaware's prison system. The James T. Vaughn Correctional Center, originally known as Delaware Correctional Center, opened in 1971. At the time, it represented a shift in how Delaware managed incarceration. Instead of relying on smaller, scattered facilities, the state centralized its male prison population into one primary location near Smyrna. The goal was efficiency. One facility. Multiple custody levels. A controlled environment designed to house everything from minimum security inmates to the most high-risk individuals in the state. Over the decades, the prison expanded. New housing units were added. Security measures were upgraded. Operational systems evolved to match national correctional standards. Eventually, the facility was renamed in honor of James T. Vaughn, a former Delaware Corrections Commissioner. Today, it remains the largest prison in the state. It houses more than 2,000 inmates, making it the core of Delaware's correctional infrastructure. But unlike larger states that distribute inmates across multiple maximum security prisons, Delaware concentrates much of its highest-risk population in this single complex. That creates a unique dynamic. Because when everything is centralized, every challenge is, too. And in corrections, centralization can mean efficiency or vulnerability, depending on how well the system holds. What maximum security really means. Maximum security is often misunderstood. It's not just about locking people away. It's about control, precise, structured, and constant. Inside Vaughn Correctional Center, inmates classified as maximum security live under strict conditions. Most of their day is spent inside a cell. These cells are compact, typically equipped with a bed, a toilet, a sink, and very limited personal space. Movement is not a right. It's scheduled. Meals are passed through small openings in the door. Recreation happens in controlled environments, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups. Showers, phone calls, and visits all follow strict protocols. Every movement is tracked. Every interaction is monitored. And every deviation from routine is evaluated as a potential risk. For correctional administrators, this structure is designed to maintain safety and prevent violence. But for inmates, the experience can feel very different. Time stretches. Days become repetitive. And the lack of freedom, even in its smallest forms, can have a measurable psychological impact. Studies across the United States have shown that long-term confinement, especially in restrictive environments, can affect mental health. That's not unique to Delaware. But inside a facility like Vaughn, where high-risk individuals are concentrated, the stakes are higher. Because control isn't just a policy. It's the system's foundation. And if that control weakens, even briefly, the consequences can escalate quickly. Inside the housing units, order and isolation. The prison is divided into multiple housing units, often referred to as pods or tiers. Each one serves a different purpose. Some house general population inmates, individuals who can move with fewer restrictions, participate in programs, and interact more freely under supervision. Others are designated for higher-risk inmates. These units operate under tighter control, with more limited movement and increased monitoring. And then there are segregation units. These are among the most restrictive areas in the facility. Inmates in segregation may be placed there for disciplinary reasons, protective custody, or administrative decisions. In these units, individuals can spend up to 23 hours a day inside their cells. Contact with others is minimal. Conversations are often reduced to brief exchanges through doors. Even recreation, when allowed, may happen alone, in enclosed spaces. Supporters of this system argue it's necessary to maintain order and protect both staff and inmates. Critics argue it can lead to long-term psychological effects. The debate continues across the United States. But inside Vaughn Correctional Center, segregation is not theoretical. It's operational. It's used daily. And it represents one of the most intense forms of incarceration in the system. Because here, control is not just about where you are. It's about how much of your world is reduced to a single room. The officers, maintaining control under pressure. Inside Vaughn Correctional Center, correctional officers are the system's front line. Their role is often misunderstood. It's not just supervision. It's constant risk assessment. Every interaction, every movement, every shift, requires attention to detail. Officers conduct routine checks, escort inmates, respond to emergencies, and enforce the rules that keep the facility functioning. But unlike many workplaces, the environment they operate in is inherently unpredictable. Tensions can rise quickly. Conflicts between inmates can escalate. And even routine procedures can become high-risk situations. Reports from correctional unions and state officials have highlighted ongoing concerns about staffing levels. When there are fewer officers available, the pressure increases. Response times can slow. Monitoring becomes more difficult. And the margin for error shrinks. This isn't unique to Delaware. It's a challenge seen across correctional systems nationwide. But in a centralized facility like Vaughn, where a large portion of the state's prison population is housed, the impact can be more concentrated. Because when staffing is stretched thin, control becomes harder to maintain. And in maximum security, control is everything. A system under strain. By the mid-2010s, signs of strain were becoming more visible. Internal reports and external reviews pointed to several ongoing challenges. Staffing shortages. Operational pressures. Concerns about inmate conditions. None of these issues were unique. They reflected broader trends across the U.S. correctional system. But within Delaware's smaller framework, they carried different weight. Because when a system is centralized, there are fewer places for pressure to go. It builds. Gradually. Quietly. Until something shifts. For years, Vaughn Correctional Center operated without drawing major national attention. Incidents occurred, as they do in any prison system, but nothing that forced widespread scrutiny. That would change in 2017. What happened next would bring national focus to this facility, and raise difficult questions about safety, preparedness, and oversight. But before that moment, there were warning signs. Subtle. Easy to overlook. But significant in hindsight. Because in environments like this, major events don't come out of nowhere. They build. Piece by piece. The 2017 Uprising, when control collapsed. February 1, 2017, a normal day. At first. February 1, 2017, started like any other day inside the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. Morning routines were underway. Officers reported for duty. Inmates followed scheduled movements. Doors opened and closed in familiar rhythms. Inside Building C, one of the prison's housing units, nothing immediately stood out. But like many major prison incidents, what would happen next didn't begin with chaos. It began quietly. According to official reports, a group of inmates in Building C had been organizing. Not in a way that was immediately visible, but enough to coordinate actions. The exact planning timeline remains partially unclear. Some details were later confirmed through investigations. Others remain unconfirmed or disputed. What is known is that by mid-morning, something shifted. And within minutes, a controlled environment would turn into a crisis. The takeover begins. At approximately 10:30 a.m., inmates in Building C initiated what would become a full-scale uprising. Details from official investigations indicate that inmates overpowered correctional staff inside the unit. Keys were taken. Control of the housing area was seized. Within minutes, the situation escalated beyond routine disturbance. Correctional officers inside the building were taken hostage. At least 4 staff members were held. The unit was effectively under inmate control. Emergency protocols were activated immediately. Other parts of the prison were locked down. Response teams began mobilizing. But inside Building C, control had already been lost. And regaining it would not be simple. Because unlike smaller incidents, this wasn't a fight or a brief disruption. This was organized. And it was contained within a secured unit, making intervention far more complex. Hostage situation unfolds. As the situation became clear, law enforcement agencies responded. State police, crisis negotiation teams, specialized correctional response units. Outside the prison, a coordinated operation began to take shape. Inside, the situation remained tense and uncertain. The inmates holding the hostages made demands. Among them, according to official reports, were complaints about prison conditions and treatment. Exact wording of all demands has not been fully publicly detailed. Some accounts differ. But what is confirmed is that communication was established between inmates and negotiators. For hours, negotiations continued. The goal was clear: resolve the situation peacefully and secure the safe release of the hostages. But inside Building C, conditions remained volatile. Officers were still being held. Tensions were high. And every decision, on both sides, carried serious risk. Because in hostage situations like this, time can either de-escalate or make things worse. Hours of uncertainty. As the hours passed, the standoff continued. Negotiators worked to maintain communication. Authorities gathered information. Tactical teams prepared for multiple possible outcomes. Inside the unit, details were limited. Visibility was restricted. Information came in fragments. Some hostages were eventually released during the standoff. But not all. And one name would soon become central to the tragedy. Correctional Officer Stephen Floyd. A veteran officer with years of experience. He was among those taken hostage. And as the situation developed, concerns about his safety grew. Because despite ongoing negotiations, control inside the building remained with the inmates. And the longer that continued, the more uncertain the outcome became. The turning point. As negotiations stretched into the afternoon, the situation reached a critical point. Details from official investigations later confirmed that Correctional Officer Stephen Floyd did not survive the incident. He was killed during the uprising. The exact sequence of events leading to his death was investigated, and multiple individuals were later charged in connection with the incident. However, some aspects of the timeline, including specific moments inside the unit, remain based on investigative findings rather than direct public footage. What is clear is that the situation had escalated beyond recovery through negotiation alone. At that point, authorities faced a difficult decision: continue negotiations or move toward tactical intervention. Because now, this was no longer just a hostage situation. It was a fatal incident. And the priority had shifted. Retaking control. By the evening of February 1st, law enforcement and correctional response teams initiated action to regain control of Building C. Details of the tactical operation are limited in public records, as is common with correctional security procedures. However, it is confirmed that the building was eventually secured. The remaining hostages were released. Inmates involved in the uprising were taken into custody. The standoff, which lasted approximately 18 hours, was over. But the impact was just beginning. Because what happened inside Vaughn Correctional Center that day was not an isolated incident. It exposed deeper issues. Operational challenges. Staffing concerns. Systemic pressures. And it raised serious questions about how such an event could happen in a maximum security environment. Questions that would lead to investigations, policy reviews, and long-term consequences for the state's correctional system. Aftermath, a system under scrutiny. In the days that followed, the focus shifted to accountability. Investigations were launched. State officials reviewed policies and procedures. Correctional practices were examined in detail. Several inmates were charged in connection with the uprising, including charges related to hostage-taking and the death of Officer Floyd. At the same time, correctional staff and unions raised concerns. They pointed to staffing shortages, working conditions, and safety risks. The incident sparked broader discussions, not just in Delaware, but across the United States. About how prisons are managed. About the balance between control and safety. And about what happens when that balance breaks down. Because what occurred at Vaughn Correctional Center was a reminder of something often overlooked: even in maximum security, control is never absolute. Aftermath, investigation, and what changed. Investigating the breakdown. When the standoff ended, the immediate crisis was over. But a much larger process had just begun. An internal investigation led by the Delaware Department of Correction, along with reviews by state officials and independent bodies, set out to answer one central question: how did inmates gain control of a maximum security unit? Early findings confirmed that the uprising was not spontaneous. It involved coordination among inmates inside Building C. Investigators examined how access points were breached, how keys were obtained, and how staff were overpowered. One critical area of focus was procedure. Were proper protocols followed? Were there warning signs that were missed? And could the incident have been prevented? Some details were confirmed through official reports. Others, particularly exact sequences inside the unit, remain based on investigative reconstruction rather than direct evidence. What became clear, however, was that the incident was not caused by a single failure. It was the result of multiple factors interacting at once: operational, structural, and human. And understanding those factors would shape everything that came next. Staffing, a critical weak point. One of the most widely discussed findings centered on staffing levels. Correctional officers and union representatives had raised concerns even before 2017. They reported that staffing shortages were affecting operations. Fewer officers on duty meant fewer eyes on inmates, and slower response times when incidents occurred. Following the uprising, these concerns gained national attention. Reports indicated that Building C was operating with fewer officers than recommended. This did not directly cause the incident, but it may have affected how quickly control could be maintained or regained. In correctional environments, staff presence plays a major role in deterrence. It affects how inmates move, how conflicts are managed, and how quickly situations are contained. When staffing is stretched thin, the balance shifts. And in a high-risk environment like maximum security, even small gaps can become significant. State officials later acknowledged staffing as a key issue and began reviewing recruitment, retention, and deployment strategies. But addressing staffing shortages is not a quick fix. It requires funding, training, and time. And in the months following the incident, those challenges remained ongoing. Conditions inside, fact versus claims. Another area of focus was inmate conditions. During the uprising, inmates reportedly voiced complaints about how the facility was being run. These included concerns about access to programs, conditions of confinement, treatment by staff. However, not all claims were independently verified. Some were documented in official reports. Others were reported through media interviews or legal filings. And some remain disputed. What is confirmed is that prison conditions became part of the public conversation after the incident. Experts and analysts pointed out that inmate grievances, whether fully validated or not, can contribute to tension over time. But it's important to separate perception from verified fact. Investigations did not conclude that conditions alone caused the uprising. Instead, they identified a combination of factors: operational pressures, staffing concerns, internal dynamics within the inmate population, all interacting at once. Because in correctional systems, major incidents rarely have a single cause. They develop through layers of complexity, some visible, others not. Accountability and charges. As investigations progressed, the legal process began. Multiple inmates were charged in connection with the uprising. Charges included kidnapping, riot-related offenses, and, in specific cases, charges related to the death of Officer Stephen Floyd. Court proceedings followed over the next several years. Prosecutors presented evidence gathered from the scene, including testimonies, forensic findings, and investigative reconstructions. Defense attorneys challenged aspects of the case, including conditions inside the prison and the events leading up to the incident. Some defendants were convicted. Others had outcomes that varied based on their level of involvement and available evidence. The legal process was complex, and not all details were publicly disclosed in full. But what it demonstrated was the difficulty of prosecuting events that occur inside a controlled, restricted environment, where evidence is limited and timelines must be reconstructed after the fact. Still, the court proceedings served as a formal step toward accountability. Not just for individuals involved, but for understanding the incident as a whole. Policy changes and reforms. In the aftermath, Delaware officials began implementing changes. Some were immediate. Others developed over time. Key areas of focus included staffing improvements. Efforts were made to recruit more correctional officers and address retention challenges. Security protocols, procedures for key control, movement, and supervision were reviewed and adjusted. Training updates. Officers received additional training focused on crisis response, communication, and safety procedures. Operational oversight. Internal reviews increased, with more attention on identifying risks before they escalate. Not all reforms were completed quickly. Some required legislative approval. Others depended on funding. And like many correctional systems, Delaware continued to face challenges in fully implementing every change. But the incident created a clear turning point. It forced a reassessment of how the facility operated and how risks were managed. Because after an event like this, returning to normal is no longer an option. Life inside today. Today, the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center continues to operate as Delaware's primary maximum security facility. Daily routines remain structured. Security remains strict. But operations now exist under increased awareness. The events of 2017 are still part of the facility's history. and they continue to influence how policies are applied. Staffing remains an ongoing issue, not just in Delaware, but across correctional systems nationwide. Efforts to improve conditions, increase safety, and prevent future incidents are still in progress. Because correctional systems are not static. They evolve, often in response to what goes wrong. And at Vaughn Correctional Center, that evolution was shaped by one of the most serious incidents the state has ever faced. Final reflection: control is never absolute. Maximum security is designed to create control. Structured movement, constant supervision, layered systems of enforcement. But the events of February 1, 2017, demonstrated something critical: control is never absolute. It depends on people, on systems, on decisions made every day, often under pressure. When those elements align, the system holds. When they don't, even the most secure environments can be tested. The story of Delaware State Prison is not just about one incident. It's about the complexity of incarceration itself. The balance between safety and management, between structure and human behavior, and the reality that behind every locked door, there is a system constantly working to maintain order. Sometimes successfully, and sometimes under strain. If this story gave you a new perspective on what really happens behind prison walls, make sure you subscribe to Life: The Unspoken Stories for more real, fact-based documentaries. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because these conversations matter. And remember, every system has a story. We'll see you in the next one.